Welcome to The Explainer. So let's talk about the U.S. housing market. What on earth just happened? Today, we're digging into the data to see why everything you thought you knew about buying a home, well, it might be totally wrong now.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty bold statement, right? We've all been sold this lie. For as long as any of us can remember, buying a house was the way to build wealth. It was just a given. But our source material is basically saying, hold on a second. At today's prices and interest rates, that old belief might not just be wrong, it could be a huge financial mistake. So let's see what the numbers actually have to say about this.
All right, so first things first, we've got to break down the new math of homeownership and figure out why the old rules just don't seem to apply anymore. Yeah, 50%. Let that number sink in for a second. Right now, across every single state in the U.S., on average, it is 50% more expensive to buy a house than it is to rent a similar one. That's not normal. This is a complete historic flip of how things used to be.
Okay, but wait a minute. You might be thinking, haven't home prices gone up? You check Zillow, you see that little estimate go up, and you feel like you're winning. And yeah, technically, prices have nudged up a little bit year over year. But trust me, that tiny little gain is hiding a much, much bigger story.
And this is where it gets really interesting and kind of painful. Because when you own a home, it's not just the mortgage payment. There are all these hidden costs that just evaporate. They don't build any equity. We're talking about mortgage interest. Look at that, almost 20 grand a year, just gone, poof. Then you've got property taxes, insurance, and, the stuff that always breaks. It adds up big time.
So here's the kicker. You add up all those costs you'll never get back, and you're looking at almost $32,000. So let's get this straight. To make $1,200 in home value, you had to spend $32,000. I mean, that's not a gain. That is a huge net loss for the year. It's just brutal math.
So you're probably asking, how is renting so much cheaper now? Well, it's actually a pretty wild market dynamic. Think about it. You have all these existing homeowners who locked in super low mortgage rates, like 3% a few years ago. Their monthly payment is way, way lower than what a new buyer would face today with a 6 or 7% rate. So that existing owner can rent their place out for a price that still makes them a profit, but that same monthly price would be a money-losing disaster for a new buyer. It's like renting has become artificially cheap, all thanks to those low-rate mortgages from the past.
Okay, so how in the world did we get here? This didn't just happen overnight. There's a whole story behind it.
This timeline really paints the picture of just how fast things went off the rails. Before 2022, buying was pretty much a no-brainer. It was the smart financial move. Then the pandemic happened. Suddenly, you have this perfect storm of low inventory, material shortages, and those record-low mortgage rates that created an absolute feeding frenzy. Prices just exploded. And now we're dealing with the hangover. We have the highest mortgage rates we've seen in decades, which has created what people are calling golden handcuffs. Basically, anyone with a low rate from a few years ago is now locked in place. They can't afford to move and get a new, much higher mortgage.
And if you want to see the core of the problem, this is it. This chart says it all. Go back to the year 2000. The average house cost about 1.7 times what the average person made in a year. Manageable, right? Now, fast forward to today. That same ratio has ballooned to 5 times the median income. It's just staggering. Our paychecks haven't even come close to keeping up.
So, who's to blame for this? Well, our source material makes a really interesting comparison to student loans. Think about it. The argument is that when the government steps in to make something more affordable, in this case by backing mortgages, it might actually have the opposite effect. It creates this artificial safety net, making sure there's always money to lend. Well, when there's always money to lend, demand goes up. And what happens next? Prices go up. And it's not just a theory. Studies in both the US and the UK have suggested there's a real link here.
All right, let's talk about the big boogeyman you always hear about. Are corporations to blame? You see it all over social media, right? The story that these giant Wall Street hedge funds are swooping in and buying up all the single-family homes, leaving nothing for the rest of us.
It's a really compelling villain for sure, but is it actually true? Let's look at the data and see who you're really up against when you put in an offer on a house.
Okay, take a look at this. It's pretty shocking, actually. 3/4, 75% of all home buyers are regular people, owner-occupiers just looking for a place to call home. Then you have another 12% who are small mom-and-pop landlords. So what about those giant evil corporations? Less than 3%. Yeah, the data is pretty clear. Your biggest competition isn't Wall Street. It's the family down the street. And when you think about it, it makes total sense. Big investors are in it to make money, right?
The numbers just don't work for them to buy a perfect, move-in-ready house at today's prices and then rent it out. They lose their shirts. So what do they do instead? They tend to buy the fixer-uppers, the distressed properties that need a ton of work, frankly, the houses that most of us wouldn't want to deal with anyway.
So, if the math is all messed up, and it's not really Wall Street's fault, is it ever a good idea to buy a house anymore? Well, according to our source, the answer is still yes, but you have to play by a completely new set of rules.
So it really comes down to two big reasons to buy today. The first one isn't about money at all. It's about emotional stability. You know, that feeling of having your own space, putting down roots, and not having to worry about a landlord kicking you out. The second reason, though, is all about the finances, and it requires a big change in how you think about your timeline.
And this right here is probably the single most important shift. Back in the day, the rule of thumb was, if you're going to stay put for 3 to 5 years, buying made sense. You'd break even. Well, forget that. Now, because the upfront costs are so insane, you might need to stay in that house for 15, 20, maybe even more years before buying actually becomes cheaper than renting. It's a massive commitment. And please, listen to this warning. So many people are buying houses they can't really afford, thinking, oh, it's fine, I'll just refinance in a year or two when rates come down. That is an incredibly risky bet. It's a gamble. A lot of people don't realize that mortgage rates don't just blindly follow what the Fed does. They're tied to all sorts of complicated things like bond markets and inflation. There is absolutely no guarantee that rates will drop enough to save you. And if you're holding your breath for a big market crash to fix everything, you're probably going to be waiting a long time. The source uses this great analogy. The housing market is like a giant tanker ship. You can't just slam on the brakes or whip it around on a dime. It's massive and it moves slowly. Any real change or correction is going to happen over the course of years, not months.
So is the American dream of homeownership changing forever? You know, looking at all this data, it seems pretty clear that the old one-size-fits-all advice is dead. That classic idea of buying a starter home, fixing it up, and climbing the property ladder, that might be a thing of the past for a lot of people. The new reality, it seems, demands that we throw out the old playbook. It means we have to take a hard, honest look at the numbers for ourselves and decide what actually makes sense for our own lives, not just blindly follow a dream we were always told to chase.